Dead America, Lowcountry Part 9. Written by Derek Slayton. Narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. Day 0 plus 12. The sunlight crept through the cracks in the makeshift curtains the group had hung on the windows in the classrooms. It was a collection of flags, wall maps, and rolling blackboards, and they did a decent job of keeping the room dark most of the time, save for when the sun was in the process of rising and shone directly on that side of the building. Despite his best efforts, Dante was unable to avoid the light. Even pulling the covers over his head wasn't enough to prevent the room from being too bright for him to continue sleeping. Once he gave in to the realization that he was awake, he tossed the cover off of his head and flopped onto his back in a huff. "I just had to pick an east-facing room," he muttered. He laid there for a moment before looking over from his gym mat bed to the makeshift cot next to him. Normally, Lily was laying there, but that particular morning she was already gone. "Man, how late did I sleep in?" he thought, shaking his head. Time didn't really matter much in the zombie apocalypse, with no time cards to punch or jobs to be late for. No rush-hour traffic and meaningless TPS reports. At least it wasn't all bad. He pulled himself up off of the ground, cracking several joints as he stretched. While he was happy to have a safe place to sleep, the thin mats weren't cutting it in regards to comfort, despite being stacked 3 high. He walked towards the door, weaving his way around the maze of desks that they'd haphazardly shoved out of the way to create a path. Just before he reached the door, it opened, and Lily popped in, startling at the sight of him. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said when she regained her composure. "Thought you were down for the count?" He smirked. "Going to take more than those mats to take me out," he replied. She winked at him and then held out a cup of coffee. He took it and took a deep whiff, moaning softly. "You really are an angel, you know that?" he asked. "And don't you forget it," she replied with another wink. "Henry needed the solar power juice for his greenhouse lights, so I had to go with instant coffee instead of brewed. Hope it's still okay." He reached out and took her hand. "It's hot, has caffeine, and I didn't have to make it," he said. "It's perfection." She grinned up at him, giving his hand an affectionate squeeze. They'd come from completely different worlds, and maybe, without the apocalypse, they never would have crossed paths. But he couldn't help but be happy they had. "So, what's on tap for today?" Dante asked. She shrugged. "I have no idea," she admitted. "Ace was muttering something about doing a run, but he doesn't have any firm idea as to where." "He probably just wants to get out for a bit," Dante said. "We've been down a few days since that warehouse trip." Lily shook her head. "My cousin was always a homebody," she said. "Not sure why he's so anxious to go anywhere." "Well, he doesn't have porn and wrestling on TV," Dante quipped. "Might have something to do with it." They shared a laugh, and then before Lily could respond, high-pitched squeals erupted from the hallway, followed by the pitter-patter of tiny footsteps and giggles. Dante and Lily stepped out into the hallway, looking down at Hazel and Violet playing chase while their mother Abigail looked on fondly. "Screeching from crotch goblins might have something to do with it too," Lily said. Dante raised his eyebrow. "Crotch goblins?" he asked. "Would you prefer fuck trophies?" she joked. He chuckled. "Crotch goblins will be fine," he said, and took a long sip of coffee. "Any idea where Ace is?" he asked. "Last I saw him, he was in the gym helping Henry with the lights," Lily replied. The high-pitched squealing intensified and Dante laughed. "Let's find him before he pokes out his eardrums with a pencil." They headed down the hallway towards the gym and playing children, still holding hands. Lily pretended to act like a lovesick teenager, burying her head into his shoulder and wrapping herself around his thick arm. "It's a shame I don't have a Letterman's jacket that you can wear," he joked. She smirked. "Just means you'll have to loot me some jewelry while you're out," she said. "I can handle that," he replied. Both of them stopped as Hazel and Violet barreled towards them. Hazel raised a hand, her little face super serious. "Where is your hall pass?" she demanded, in an adorably authoritative voice. Violet hung back behind her, still a little wary of Dante. The couple patted themselves down, playing along, and then he snapped his fingers. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't happen to have one," he said. Hazel huffed out her little chest. "Well, I'm going to have to send you to the principal's office," she declared. "Oh, that's all the way at the other end of the school," Dante replied playfully. "If you did that, then we'd have to be in the hallway without a hall pass for a lot longer." Hazel screwed up her face in thought for a moment, the wheels turning in her head as she struggled to figure out a solution to the problem. "You know," Lily began slowly, "you could send us to the gym for the punishment. It's just over there, and you can keep an eye on us to make sure we don't get into trouble." The little girl gave an exaggerated nod and held up a warning finger. "Okay, your punishment is to go to the gym," she said firmly. "Tough, but fair," Lily said. "I like it." The girls stepped aside so they could pass, and they went back to their game of chase. Dante stopped beside Abigail and glanced back at the happy kids. "I remember being young and having that kind of energy," he said. "Same here," Abigail replied with a laugh. "Quite frankly, it's how I ended up with those two." The couple laughed along with her, happy for the levity in such a difficult time in the world. "I think we're making a run today," Lily said. "Is there anything you and the girls need?" Abigail thought for a moment and then shook her head. "I think we're set up pretty well," she said. "The library still had some books and games in it. Not that it really matters to those two, since they seem to be doing a good job of keeping themselves entertained." "If you ever think of anything, we're happy to keep an eye out for whatever you need," Dante assured her. Abigail smiled. "I appreciate that," she said. The couple nodded and then headed into the gym. As they opened the doors, they looked around at the massive amount of progress Henry had made in there. The bleachers had been pushed back, giving as much floor space as possible. There were 5 rows of tables stretching the entire length of the room, most of which had glass boxes lined up beside each other. Grow lights created an eerie glow over the makeshift planter boxes. Henry, Tegan, and Tate walked around with watering cans as the former instructed them on the proper hydration techniques for the various plants. "For a little stoner kid, that Henry knows his shit," Lily murmured. Dante chuckled. "No kidding," he agreed. "I can confidently say I couldn't pull off this kind of build." They watched as the young stoner explained to Tegan how to properly pour, and she managed to replicate his instructions flawlessly. "Holy shit, that boy is a miracle worker," Lily drawled. "That girl can't even tie her shoes, and he managed to teach her something." Dante raised an eyebrow. "You don't think too highly of her, do you?" he asked. "You've seen the type of moron she's dating," she quipped. He raised his eyebrow, staring down at her with a knowing look. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms in playful haughtiness. "Yes, I dated him too," she said. "But I was smart enough to upgrade." She waggled her eyebrows at him, and then pretended to give him some redneck crazy eyes. He laughed. "Rather than risk digging myself into a hole," he said, "I'm just going to smile and nod." "See, you're already smarter than she is," Lily said, patting his shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Let's go see if they know where Ace is." She winked at him. "Changing the subject. Really smart man," she joked, and they headed over to the trio of gym farmers. "Hey, have y'all seen Ace?" Lily asked. "I think he's at the outdoor garden with some of the others," Tate said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "He'd better be, because we need to plant and get that field tilled today," Henry said. "How's it going in here?" Dante asked, motioning around him. Henry nodded. "It's going good. We're seeing a couple of things start to pop up," he replied. "Nothing really exciting, just some radishes and spinach. But if push comes to shove, it'll keep us going." "How soon until we can get some fresh salad?" Lily asked hopefully. He tilted his head back and forth. "Still a couple of weeks, I'm afraid," he replied. I have these planters on a cycle, so once we get the first harvest, there should be a steady stream of fresh stuff every few days. In the meantime, however, we have enough canned goods to keep us going until then." "You're doing good work, buddy," Dante said. "Keep it up." Tegan glared at Lily, jutting out her chin, but the latter brushed it off and followed Dante outside. As they stepped through the doors and the sunlight smacked them in the face, she hissed, squinting her eyes at the change in brightness. "You a vampire, hun?" Dante joked. "Years of working in that hotel conditioned me," she replied. "Because if there was sunlight, it meant people weren't far behind." He wrinkled his nose. "Think I'd rather be a vampire." "Trust me, you would," she agreed. They looked around for the others, seeing them about 50 yards away near the football field. A large group of their friends dug trenches in the grass with shovels and hoes. Several rows stretched from one end zone to the other, but more were needed, so they continued to dig. It was slow going, with the ground being tough, but they kept at it. As Dante and Lily approached, the others paused, wiping sweat from their brows and leaning on their tools to regard the couple. "Good of you to join us, Scarface," Ace drawled. "We could use some extra manpower." Lily rolled her eyes. 10 minutes ago you were bitching about how you wanted to do a run somewhere," she said. "And now you want to dig?" "Oh, I still want to go," her cousin replied, raising a hand. "We just haven't figured out where to yet." Maddox shrugged. "We've already gutted this town," he said. "Not that there was a whole hell of a lot to get." "We could go back to the warehouse in Savannah," Francis suggested. "Nah, man. We should give that place a full week to clear out before heading back there," Ace replied, shaking his head. "Besides, we know what's there, and it's more the same of what we already got." Cam cocked his head. "What else are you wanting to get?" he asked. "Some ammo would be nice," Ace replied. "If we run into those QXR fuckers, it would be nice to have something other than a hoe to throw at them." Lily smirked. "I don't know. I'd gladly throw Tegan at them," she quipped. "She looks like she could handle several of them at once." Maddox opened his mouth to argue, but Dante glared at him from behind her, shaking his head, no. "We've checked every house in town," Cam continued, ignoring the exchange to keep the conversation on track. "The businesses have all been gutted by QXR, or God only knows who. Nothing left in the local gun shop either. There probably isn't a bullet in the wild for 50 miles. "It's a shame the internet is down," Bailey said with a sigh. "It'd be nice to click a few buttons and have it in our mailbox in a few days." Ace let out a whoop, dropping his hoe and running over to Bailey, wrapping her in a bear hug. "Girl, you are a goddamn genius," he exclaimed. Everyone stared at him warily. "I think your cousin might be broken," Dante said slowly, leaning down towards Lily. "Given his normal level of broken, I'm kind of amazed that you can tell," she replied, and then regarded Ace. "Cuz, what in the world are you talking about?" "Think about it," the redneck replied, letting go of Bailey and raising his palms to them. "Where is the one place those QXR assholes wouldn't think to look for stuff?"
"Thankfully, this high school," Francis said gruffly.
Yeah, but I'm talking about out there in the town," Ace replied. "If you're a mercenary with orders to empty out the town of useful things, you're going to hit houses and businesses, right?" The group stared at him, still confused, but replied in the affirmative. "But you know where you're not going to bother?" he asked, excitement in his eyes. "The post office." His friends weren't catching on, and most of them shrugged. Bailey still looked shell-shocked from the hug, shaking her head in confusion at the underwhelming declaration. "Now, this shit broke out on a Wednesday, right?" Ace continued. "Well, I know for a fact that the gun shop here in town gets their ammo shipment on Wednesdays." Lily rolled her eyes. "You dumbass," she drawled. "You can't send ammunition through the mail. You have to use one of those expensive carriers." "That is true, Lil," he said, pointing a finger at her. "But what you are forgetting is that this is a podunk shitheel of a town. And you know what those big carriers do for towns like this? Maddox nodded, suddenly catching on.
They contract out the post office for that last-mile delivery, he supplied.
Bingo! Ace cried, excitedly pointing at him. Lily shook her head and glanced at Dante. What do you think? She asked.
I think it's worth a look, he admitted. Plus, it sounds a lot more fun than digging a trench.
Maddox raised a fist.
Hey, fucking men to that, he declared. Francis, let's get the trucks and go on a post office run.
The hulking man turned to Bailey, his gaze softening as he bent to address her.
I'll be back soon, he said.
She blushed. You be careful, she said. Use those gloves I made you. He smiled at her and then headed off to follow Maddox. Cam and Philip dropped their tools and began to follow, but Maddox whirled around.
Whoa, where are you boys going? He demanded.
Philip raised an eyebrow. With you, to the post office, he asked. The redneck shook his head.
I think we can handle it, he replied. You'll be of more use here digging.
Cam smacked his friend on the arm, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. Philip's shoulders slumped. But I want to head out there, he whined. Trust me, it's not all it's cracked up to be, Cam assured him, clapping him on the shoulder. Philip blew a raspberry, but then followed his companion back to the dig. Chapter 2. Ace, Dante, and Lily rode in the lead truck, with Maddox and Francis helming the one behind them. The post office was a few miles to the northeast of the school, on the other side of the highway. Ace took it slow, going about 30 miles per hour through the neighborhoods. Over the last week or so, they'd done a fairly good job of clearing out the zombies, at least on that side of town. Still, they'd left several stragglers roaming about in case of a QXR patrol. By leaving ghouls, they'd hopefully throw the mercenaries off of their trail, leading anyone heading through to believe the area was uninhabited. Other than the occasional corpse wandering through a yard, there wasn't much else to see. The homes had been shut up tight after looting them, again to make it look like nobody was around. As they approached the interstate crossover, Ace stopped on the side of the road, taking shelter underneath a large tree. "You see anything on the highway up there?" the redneck asked. Lily shook her head, not seeing anything other than a couple of ghouls wandering down the road. "Just those hitchhikers," she said. "Unless they're going back to that gas station to fill up again, I wouldn't expect them to come down here," Dante said. "Bluffton and Beaufort are going to have a lot more things to offer than this place." Ace took a deep breath. "Man, I hope you're right," he murmured, and then hit the gas. The vehicle sped through the underpass. A few blocks up, Ace made the turn towards the north and encountered a bit of a zombie mob. It wasn't anything major, about 10 or so creatures in the road about 50 yards away. "How close is the post office?" Dante asked. The redneck shrugged. "Couple of blocks on the other side of those things," he said. "I hate taking out that many this close to the interstate," Dante mused, "because it'll look suspicious, but I don't really see any other option." "I'll wave 'em up," Ace said, and rolled down the window to motion for Maddox to pull up beside them. "We gotta take these critters out," he called. Maddox shrugged from the driver's seat. "Why don't y'all just plow through them and we'll pick off the stragglers?" he suggested. "Don't forget to stash them out of sight once you're done," Dante said, leaning over from the passenger seat. "Can't risk attracting attention." Maddox nodded. "We'll chuck them behind the bushes in front of that house over there," he said. "That works," Dante agreed. "Happy hunting." Ace nodded before rolling up his window and revving the engine a few times. The mob up ahead took notice of the noise and shambled towards the vehicles, arms outstretched and mouths agape. "What are you thinking?" Dante asked. The redneck held out a hand. "Straight down the middle," he declared. "Break 'em up a bit for the other two." "Punch it," Dante said with a nod. Ace slammed his foot on the gas and the truck picked up speed quickly. In a matter of seconds, he hit the lead zombie in the center of the pack, reducing it to a pile of crumpled flesh as the front bumper destroyed its torso. A few other ghouls bounced off of the front end of the truck, slamming hard into the ground. Once they were through the line, Ace slowed down to a stop. The trio glanced behind them, watching Maddox pick up speed and then cutting hard to the right, executing a handbrake skid. The vehicle did a 180 in the road, tires squealing as the back end whipped around, slamming into the ghouls on the left side of the road. The impact was forceful enough to send the ghouls flying through the air, slamming into the pavement with their brethren. With that one maneuver, only 2 zombies were left standing. Francis hopped out with his metal gloves on and began pounding every ghoul nearby with forceful punches that crushed their skulls. By the time Maddox got out of the truck with his baseball bat, his companion had wiped the whole horde out.
"I'll say this," Dante declared. "I'm glad he's on our side."
"No fucking shit," Ace agreed. Dante turned to face front and motioned ahead.
"Come on, let's get to the post office," he said.
The redneck accelerated, and they sped off for the post office. It was a mid-sized building, about as large as a single-family home. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but no movement that they could see.
"Front door or back?"
Ace asked. Dante pursed his lips.
"Park it in the back," he suggested. "If we can't get in, we can always walk around."
The redneck followed the instructions, parking around the back by the loading dock door. The trio got out, prepping their bats and machetes as they approached the large door. Ace went for the handle and gave it a jerk, but it didn't move. He tried a few more times before getting frustrated, smacking the metal door a few times.
"Locked up tighter than a nun's cooch," he barked.
"Classy," Lily drawled, rolling her eyes. "Accurate, but classy." Dante approached the service entrance and paused at the sound of banging.
"Woke somebody up?" he said.
They stood there for a few moments, listening to try and get a read on how many were inside. It sounded like 3 sets of hands on the inside of the loading dock door. "Looks like we have to go in through the front," Lily suggested.
"I'll take care of it," Dante said. "I want you two to stay here and keep them occupied."
She jutted out her chin. "You ain't going in there alone," she said firmly. Ace smirked at Dante, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "You aren't winning this one." Deciding to pick his battles, the larger man sighed.
"Ace, you good out here?" he asked.
"Yeah, I'll keep 'em occupied," the redneck assured him, waving them off. Dante and Lily walked around the building, leaving Ace to gently tap on the metal while keeping his head on a swivel, to make sure nothing snuck up on him. When the couple reached the front doors, Dante found them unlocked. "Guess they have P.O. boxes in here," he said, and slipped inside. The duo did a quick sweep of the immediate area. There were several rows of mailboxes on the wall, but no signs of life. They listened carefully, and could only hear the ghouls in the back of the building that were moaning and banging, trying to get to Ace. Lily approached the counter, but there was a metal gate firmly secured to the wall. She pulled on it, but it didn't move. "Locked up tight," she said.
"There should be a package door somewhere," Dante suggested.
They walked through the building, finally finding the package door. As they approached, Dante saw that it was ajar. He raised a finger to his lips, and they crept quietly, not wanting to alert the creatures in the back to their presence. Dante handed his bat to Lily, and she held it in one hand, machete in the other. He pulled out a knife, which would be easier for close combat. He gently opened the door, peering into the darkened storeroom. The only light came from a small skylight along the top part of the wall, making it difficult to see. He led them inside, pausing at a sorting counter and ducking down. There were pallets of goods spread around the room, the majority of which were against the wall. A few boxes stood on a sorting table, along with a significant amount of blood. Dante peeked over, his eye adjusting to the light finally. He could make out 3 zombies dressed in Postal Service attire, all of them blood-soaked and torn. The creatures faced the metal door, banging and snarling away. He turned and gave some hand signals to Lily, letting her know to take the one on the left, and he'd take the 2 on the right. He quietly took the bat back, keeping the knife in his offhand. The 2 of them came around the corner of the sorting table, walking quietly to get into position. They exchanged a glance and a nod, and then struck. Lily jammed the tip of her machete into the back of a ghoul's head, just as Dante stabbed the zombie on the right with his knife. The center one grew agitated, whirling back and forth as if undecided on which noise to turn towards. Dante grabbed its head and smashed it against the metal door, caving in its head. The corpse fell to the floor in a heap, convulsing a bit. He stomped on it one more time for good measure. "You good?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Yep," she replied. She walked past him, finding the latch on the door and throwing it open. She lifted up on the rolling metal door, getting it about a foot off of the ground. Dante and Ace grabbed the bottom, all of them working together to shove the door up as hard as they could. A few seconds later, the entire room was bathed in sunlight, illuminating their hall. "Made short work of them," Ace said, motioning to the bodies on the floor. "It was only 3, Lily replied. Her cousin shrugged. "Still, nice work," he said. "So, what are we looking for?" Dante asked, approaching one of the shelves. "Brown boxes," Ace replied. "Probably on a pallet." The group fanned out, inspecting the piles of boxes around the room. Dante found several boxes addressed to the school as well as various houses. Lily didn't have any luck in her area either, but then Ace let out a whistle. "Woo!" he cried. "Got it!" They converged on his position, finding 10 large boxes stacked up on a pallet. As they approached, Ace pulled out his knife and opened one up, pulling out a box of 9mm handgun ammunition. "Am I good, or am I good?" he declared proudly. "Not bad, cuz," Lily said, patting him on the shoulder. "Not bad." They started doing a quick inventory, shouting out calibers as they went. Dante didn't join in, crossing his arms and sinking deep into thought. "Something on your mind?" Lily asked, brow furrowing. He sighed. "Yeah, Grace," he said. "Well, yeah," Ace drawled, "but she usually doesn't provoke that kind of deep, distracted thought. Now, what you thinking about?" "I'm thinking it's time we start working on getting her back," he said firmly. There was a pause, and the other two exchanged a concerned look. "Now that we have ammo, there's not a whole lot more we can do to set that school up as a home," Dante continued. Lily nodded. "So what are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking we head up towards Bluffton," he replied. "At least close enough to take a look around, see if we can find some way back onto Hilton Head." She shook her head sadly. "Even with this find, we're not much of a match for QXR," she said slowly. "I know," Dante agreed, "which is why I want to find some way to get in there that isn't direct. And the only way we're going to do that is if we start looking." Ace shrugged. "Fuck it, man. I'm in," he declared. "I got some extra 9mm mags in the truck with the guns to match. Let's reload and get ready to roll. Maddox and Francis shouldn't have a problem getting this pallet back to the base." "Why just the pallet?" Lily asked. "Let's take it all. Never know what people are ordering off of the internet." "I'll tell you what," Ace said. "Y'all start staging stuff for 'em, and I'll get the guns ready." He grabbed a few boxes of bullets, and the others nodded, pulling packages from the shelves and carrying them to the loading dock. Lily smirked. "I wonder how Maddox is going to take the news." Chapter 3.
"Are you out of your fucking minds?"
Maddox cried, throwing up his hands.
"You want to go to Bluffton?"
"We will have people on that island," Lily replied, "and we're going to get them."
"Yeah, and bring QXR down hard on our heads," he shot back. "You fuckers are crazy."
Dante raised his hands. "Don't worry, we aren't raiding the island today," he assured him. "Just going to scout around, see what we can see."
"Still a hell of a risk, man,"
Maddox replied, crossing his arms.
"So was you guys coming to get me?"
Francis cut in. Maddox glanced at him, the hulking man mid-carrying several boxes to the truck. The redneck contemplated for a few moments before finally nodding in agreement.
"Okay,"
he said, taking a deep breath.
"But you listen, and listen good. This school is our home, and we don't have another one to get to. If you think for even a second that you are being followed,
You hold tight at 1247 Evergreen. It's about a mile to the east of here. Lily and Ace know where it is because it's my parents' house. We spent many a night smoking up in the basement before I got my shanty in the woods." Dante nodded firmly. "We won't lead them back. You have my word," he said. "All right then," Maddox replied, and took a deep breath. "Well, y'all get going. Francis and I will finish up here." Dante nodded, and the trio got into their vehicle. Ace hit the gas and sped towards Bluffton. He took back roads, figuring the further out from civilization they were, the better. Not only were there fewer zombies, but also a reduced likelihood of running into QXR. The drive was tense and quiet, with Dante staying focused on the mission. The other two didn't speak, not wanting to break his concentration given he was their best chance at survival. Finally, he asked, "So, how are we approaching?" "Man, I know you want to get into Bluffton," Ace said gingerly. "But if it's all the same to you, I'd prefer not to do a suicide run today. Now that said, we can come up through Pritchardville, which is a few miles south of Bluffton proper. It's not exactly a town per se, more of a speed bump on the highway that makes you slow down to 35, so the local cops can nag you for not slamming on the brakes fast enough, so they can fund their picnics and whatnot." As Ace caught his breath from his rant, Dante cocked his head. "How does that help us?" he asked. "Well, that highway runs parallel to the main stretch in Bluffton," the redneck explained, "and will take us straight to the water's edge." Lily rummaged around in the back seat, digging through bags and other assorted trash on the floorboards. Cuz?" she asked. "Yeah, Lil?" Ace replied. "We don't appear to have any binoculars," she drawled, "which is going to make looking across the water a bit more difficult, wouldn't you say?" He groaned. "Damn it. I know exactly where those bastards are," he groaned. "Took 'em up to the roof so we could keep watch around the school." "Looks like we're backtracking," Lily said. Ace grunted, but then his eyes widened and he excitedly smacked the steering wheel. "It's not that big of a deal. We're not that far away," Lily said. "Nah, we can just go to Kate's," he exclaimed. His cousin raised an eyebrow. "I'm pretty sure whatever gutter skank you are thinking of isn't going to be alive for a visit," she drawled. "Nah, I'm talking about Kate's Sporting Goods," Ace replied. "That little shop in Pritchardville where the local high school kids would have to go get their Letterman's jackets at. Hell, I bet they have some binoculars." Dante raised his eyebrow. "Looks like you might be getting a jacket from me after all," he joked, smirking over his shoulder at Lily. She cracked a smile and playfully pushed at his shoulder. "Wouldn't QXR have cleared that place out already?" she asked. "Can't imagine why they would," Ace replied with a shrug. "Hell, they probably don't even know it's there. Not like they had a huge neon sign or anything." Dante nodded. "I think it's worth a shot," he said. "All right, let's do this," Ace declared, and punched the gas. The rest of the drive was only a few minutes, as they were close to Pritchardville. When they hit the town limits, the redneck instinctively hit the brakes, sending the others lurching forward in surprise. "Sorry, force of habit," he said sheepishly. "The fucking cops in this town loved giving me tickets." The group looked around and down side streets, and one thing was constant: corpses in the road. Bodies were strewn everywhere, just shoved to the side of the road and left to rot. "Safe to say QXR has been through here," Dante muttered. Lily shook her head. "Well, if they were, they didn't do a thorough job," she added, pointing down one of the streets where a few ghouls were wandering about. "Could have broken out of a house," Ace suggested. "Or wandered up here from the country," Dante said. "Bound to be a few farmhouses and secluded people in these parts." "Shit, man. At this point, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that these things are reproducing," the redneck drawled, rolling his eyes. "No matter how many of them we kill, there are always more." He drove up a few more blocks before hanging a right. There was a zombie in the middle of the road, and he smacked into it, splattering guts all over the grill. Another block down, he turned into the parking lot of a cheaply made strip mall. There were a few shops, most of which seemed empty. One down by the corner had the front blinds pulled, with a small hand-painted wooden sign in the front reading Kate's Sporting Goods. Ace cut the engine, and the trio got out of the truck, stretching their legs and readying their melee weapons. They looked around for threats, but found none. Lily approached the sign to inspect it. With spectacular advertising like this, I'm surprised that this place isn't overrun with business, she said dryly, poking the sign that was about the size of a pizza box.
Shit, Lil. Kate didn't need to advertise, Ace replied, rolling his eyes. When she got the school contract for jackets and band uniforms, she was all set.
Wonder who she fucked to get that sweet honeypot, Lily quipped. Ace snorted.
Oh, that would be Mr. Sturgis, head of the school board, he said, and Mr. Handland. And if you believe the rumors, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
Dante shrugged. I'm not appalled, just impressed. Well, let's just hope with all that ill-gotten school money that she stocked some other sporting good essentials, Lily said, and approached the door. She grabbed the handle and tugged, finding it locked. She didn't wait for instruction, simply flipped her machete with expert grace and used the handle to smash open the glass beside the lock. She gave it a second to make sure nothing was moving by the door, and then reached in to unlock it. As they revealed the store, a musty smell hit them, like the inside hadn't been aired out in years. The three of them coughed as they walked in, and Dante pulled the blinds to illuminate the room. Stacks upon stacks of jackets and uniforms lined every rack in the store, easily rising 7 or 8 feet into the air. They did a quick sweep of the area, finding it empty. So, any idea where we should start looking for what we need? Lily asked. Ace motioned to the back of the store.
Pretty sure there's a display case in the back that's buried by uniforms, he said. Why don't you try the front counter and see if there's anything?
I'll take a look in the back, Dante said, and the trio fanned out to hit their respective targets. Ace shoved uniforms off of the back display case, seeing that it was just filled with yet even more clothes.
God damn, how big was this band? He muttered.
Lily reached the front counter, looking behind it to make sure there were no surprises. When she saw the coast was clear, she slipped behind the counter and began rummaging through the shelves. As she did this, Dante moved to the back of the store. There was a small door at the back, and he cracked it open a hair. Immediately there was a thud, followed by moaning, slamming the door shut once again. "Oh God, you okay?" Lily called. Dante nodded. "Yeah, just an unwelcome surprise," he replied. "Door's holding pretty good, but I don't think we should stay any longer than we need to." Lily immediately went back to work looking for binoculars. She picked up a heavy box and ripped it open, finding what they were looking for. "Got 'em," she declared, and rummaged around on the same shelf, finding a couple more boxes and setting them on the counter. "Got some for all of us, as a matter of fact." The boys wandered over and ripped into the boxes. "Anything else useful down there?" Dante asked. Lily scanned the counter and pulled out an old GPS system, still in the box, and tossed it down with the binoculars. "It's probably way out of date, but it might be useful," she said.
"It ain't like we're paying for the stuff. Might as well take it,"
Ace said. The banging on the back door intensified, and wood began to crack and groan.
"Exactly how strong was that door?" Ace asked.
Dante turned towards it. "I think we're about to find out," he said, and the door gave way. The cheap building material cracked under the force of a zombie. It was once a middle-aged female, and it staggered out covered in bite marks, moaning and reaching for the trio. Dante acted quickly, grabbing a letterman's jacket off of the pile next to him and tossing it over her head. The zombie thrashed about, furious with the unexpected blindness. During this brief window, Ace stepped up with his bat and smacked down hard on the zombie's head, finally rendering it motionless.
"Well, there goes Kate," he said,
and then turned to the others.
"Everybody good?"
The others nodded, and then he led the way towards the back room, pulling out his flashlight. He fired it up, finding not a storeroom, but a small office. There was blood everywhere, as well as a corpse on the ground. He knelt to examine it, its head caved in with a soiled paperweight next to it.
"Looks like she locked herself in here with a sicko who turned," Ace said, shaking his head. "Girl never had a chance."
"Do a quick sweep in there," Dante suggested. "See if there's anything useful. If not, then we should get moving." Ace opened up the desk drawers and let out a low whistle when he spotted a .38 Special 6-shooter revolver, still in its pink leather ankle holster. He picked it up and inspected it, finding it loaded. He tossed it to his cousin.
"Don't say I never got you anything," he declared.
Lily turned the holster over in her hand, shaking her head. "Nothing like bubblegum pink to help you conceal a weapon," she said dryly. Dante inclined his head. "You should put it on," he suggested. "Just hide it as best as you can with your sock. Never know when it might come in handy." She shrugged and nodded, strapping the gaudy holster around her ankle, and then the trio gathered up their bounty and headed back to the truck. Chapter 4. Ace pulled the truck off of the highway and into a small neighborhood. He moved a few houses down before pulling into a driveway and shutting the engine off. Lily furrowed her brow. "This doesn't look like the shore, cuz," she said, leaning forward.
"No, it does not," Ace agreed. "About a mile and a half to the east, but given how close we are to the island and Bluffton proper, I thought it best to go on foot rather than alert the whole damn area we're here. This engine is a lot of things, but quiet ain't one of them."
Dante nodded. "He's right. We can move through the yards and stay out of sight a lot easier on foot," he agreed. Lily smirked. "Well, if I get blisters on my feet, you're carrying me," she joked.
"Can you all not with the foreplay?" Ace drawled. "We got work to do."
Lily and Dante shared a playful glance as they got out of the truck. They stepped out onto the residential street, and it was fairly quiet.
"What do you think? Roads or yards?" Ace asked.
Dante contemplated for a few moments, and then turned when a few zombies staggered across an intersection a few blocks up. "Yards," he decided. "Don't kill anything unless we absolutely have to. If a patrol comes through here, we don't want them to know we've been here." The group moved to the backyard of the house, checking the corner to make sure they were alone. As they started walking to the east, they heard footsteps and moans on the pavement. They ran up to the side of the house, and Dante peeked out towards the road to watch the mini-mob wander by. Once the coast was clear, he led them through a couple more yards, reaching the road. There were several ghouls still there, looking around, enticed by the sounds of their brethren moaning up ahead, but they weren't moving from their spot. "No running," Dante whispered, back to the others. "Fast walk, soft steps." Lily and Ace nodded, and he led them out from behind cover, moving relatively quickly but taking care not to cause noise on the pavement. Miraculously, they reached the other side without alerting the ghouls. "That's a first," Lily murmured. Ace nodded. "Maybe today is our day," he whispered. Lily didn't say anything, simply smacked him in the back of the head for jinxing them. He wrinkled his nose and shot her a look that said, "My bad," and then the trio continued on. The rest of the trip through the neighborhood was quick. They spotted a few more groups of zombies, but none of them were close enough to cause them any danger. Even though they were at the end of the neighborhood, they still weren't at the water's edge. "So, now what, cuz?" Lily asked. Ace shook his head. "There's gotta be a landing dock around here somewhere," he said. "Gonna have to risk the highway," Dante murmured. "Come on." The trio moved down to the highway, checking both ways for traffic, and thankfully there wasn't any. As they looked, Lily spotted water due south of them across the road and the field. "Well, there's water," she said. Ace shook his head. "Not the water we're looking for, Lil," he said. "If you feel like swimming, that'll take you down to Palmetto Bluff, but it doesn't go far enough to the east to see Hilton Head. If it did, we'd be down there, trust and believe." Dante motioned for them to follow him, and moved quickly up the side of the highway. Ace kept his head on a swivel from the rear, constantly looking back for signs of trouble. Dante kept his gaze ahead, spotting what looked like a vehicle with a boat on a trailer behind it, about a quarter-mile up on the right. The end of the highway was just past that, less than a mile ahead. "That's got to be the docks up there," he said. Ace clucked his tongue. "If it is, then what's that boat doing out there and not in the water?" he asked. They shared a look, both feeling like it couldn't mean anything good. The trio slowly moved up towards the vehicle, but as they grew closer they realized it was a line of vehicles towing boats all the way down the dock driveway. Lily jumped back as a zombie inside of an SUV slammed up against one of the windows, startling her. The trio raised their weapons, preparing for a fight, but it didn't come. Zombies inside the vehicles attempted to get to them, scraping rotten fingernails against the glass, gnashing their teeth and smearing bloody goo everywhere. "What in the hell is this?" Lily breathed. Dante shook his head. "They tried to escape like you did to the water," he said slowly. "Only everybody had the same idea." "And no private hotel docks," she added, shaking her head. "Jesus, that must have been a horrible way to go." The group started walking through the vehicle graveyard, making sure to stay away from the vehicles as much as possible, in case something was hiding underneath one of them. The driveway was packed thick with trucks, SUVs, and boats, some of them wrecked on their side just off of the road. As they came around the corner to the main parking lot, all they could do was stop and gape. There were a dozen or so vehicles jam-packed together. It looked like someone panicked while turning around to put their boat in the water, and it set off a chain reaction. Couldn't have been much longer before the runners hit them, and there wasn't anything anyone could do. As the trio worked their way to the waterfront, they tensed up at the sound of thrashing and something smacking against metal. As they came around a large truck, they spotted a tall zombie smushed between the truck and the side of an SUV. Its legs were pinned, so all it could do was flail about, attempting to get free. "At least someone tried to fight back against them," Ace murmured. Dante took out his machete and walked over, rearing back and smacking it in the head with the blade to end its tortured existence. As the body slumped down on the hood, the only noise left was faint tapping from the inside of the glass. "Let's get to the water," he said, "but be careful and stay out of sight. If they do have patrols, we don't want to be seen by them." Lily nodded. "We'll follow your lead," she said. Dante led them up to the water's edge, using an SUV for cover. The three of them lined up and took out their binoculars, peering out over the water. The island was a couple miles over, and they could just make out the shoreline with the naked eye. They pulled out the binoculars and started looking, but with the distance it was difficult to see anything in detail. "Well, this ain't much help," Ace muttered. Lily shrugged. "Sure it is. We can see the island," she replied. "Just not what's on it," he shot back. "Every bit of info we can get is important," she said firmly, and glared at him with a gaze that told him to shut up, because this was important to Dante. He got the message and closed his mouth. "Well, we can't see what's on the island," Dante murmured as he scanned, "but we can certainly see what's guarding it." He pointed to the water, prompting the others to look. There was a large speedboat with a 50 cal machine gun mounted on the front. It sped by before turning around and heading back in the other direction. "Definitely a patrol," Ace said, lowering his binoculars. "Question, though, is if it's just here or all the way around the island." Dante took a deep breath. "Another question for another day," he said. "Giving up already?" the redneck asked. "No, just seen enough," Dante replied. "If they're patrolling the waterfront like this, it's safe to assume that the bridge is still fortified. In my head, I was hoping that they would be stretched too thin to cover the water, but I was sorely mistaken." His shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry for dragging you all out here." "Shit, brother. It ain't no thing," Ace assured him. "We're gonna get Grace back, and we can't do that by just sitting on our asses in the school. Gotta do recon like this if it's gonna happen." Lily gently touched Dante's arm, giving his tricep a reassuring squeeze. He smiled affectionately at her, "Thank you," he said. "Now come on, let's get back before QXR notices we're here." They began to retreat, carefully walking back past the entombed zombies, forever stuck in traffic. They were tense as they hurried back down the highway, but there was no activity and they made it back into the cover of the neighborhood safely. However, as they took the first few steps into the backyard, gunshots rang out in the distance and the trio scrambled behind cover.
"Where in the fuck was that?"
Ace hissed. Dante shook his head. "Somewhere up ahead. Can't get a read on it," he said. They strained their ears, a few more shots popping off, and then celebratory yells went up. "Get in the house, move!" Dante urged, and led them to the nearest window. It was only a few feet off of the ground, and he took his knife, slipping the blade into the locking mechanism and giving it a good hard smack. He quickly snapped the safety lock protector and opened up the window, hauling himself inside. As soon as his feet touched the floor, moaning erupted from a few yards away, and he whipped around to face two ghouls lumbering towards him. Dante retreated quickly, grabbing the first creature by the shirt and shoving it back into the other one, putting his entire weight behind the push. He managed to pin them against the wall, quickly jamming his knife into their faces repeatedly until they were both not moving. The gunfire and celebratory whooping kicked up, as if it were getting closer, and he rushed back to the window as Lily and Ace leapt in, gently closing it behind them. Dante motioned for Ace to clear the kitchen quietly as he moved down the hall. A few moments later, the trio convened in the living room, having found the house clear. They took a knee, staying out of sight, straining their ears so they could hear the group outside.
"Man, this is such a shit detail," a man declared. "I thought we already had this neighborhood cleared out." "They tried, but somebody had the bright idea to send some dumbass civilians down here to do the job," a second man replied. "Few of them got eaten, and the rest scattered."
"Fucking worthless, man," yet another man piped up. "But hey, if you got 'em, use 'em, right?" There was a round of laughter, and then it cut off abruptly. "What is it?" one of them asked. "Thought I saw something move inside there," came the reply.
"You're just seeing shit again,"
the first one retorted.
"I'm telling you, I saw something move,"
the other one whined.
"Well, if you're so damn sure, then why don't you go check it out?"
the third man snapped.
"All right, I will,"
came the response. Dante and the others on high alert quietly moved to the front window, looking out through the gap in the blinds, staying in the darkness and out of sight. The QXR mercenary approached the house next to theirs and kicked in the front door.
"Get over here, motherfuckers!"
he bellowed, and then the three men disappeared into the house. There was a commotion inside, followed by panicked screams, and then the mercenaries emerged with 4 civilians in tow. The men yelled at them to stay down, shoving them all to the ground in the front yard. The civilians were older, one looking as old as 60, but the rest maybe in their 40s. It was difficult to get a good look with the QXR mercenaries standing with their backs towards Dante, partially blocking their view.
"You boys are a bunch of pansies,"
the oldest man cried.
"I fought for my country and served proudly. Not like you bunch of cow—"
His insult was cut off as one of the men smashed his face with the butt of his rifle. The man collapsed into the grass, blood rushing down his face, as the other man and 2 women with him screamed and sobbed in fear.
"You shut your pie hole, old man,"
the mercenary snarled.
"Not our fault you weren't smart enough to get your market value."
One of the other QXR men shrugged. "So what do we do with them?"
"That no-name bastard said to retrieve them,"
the first mercenary said.
"But to be honest, I don't want to hear Mosley chew us out for not putting traitors down."
"What do we do with the bodies?" the other one asked. The first one jerked a thumb over his shoulder.
"Shit, man.
The waterfront is half a mile that way," he drawled. "We can just throw 'em in and let nature deal with them. If they're ever found, it'll look like they tried to swim for it and didn't make it."
"Good enough for me," the other one agreed.
Lily tugged on Dante's arm. "We can't let this happen," she hissed.
"The hell we don't,"
Ace whispered.
"Don't really want to get shot today, Lil."
She focused on Dante, ignoring her cousin. "What if that was Grace out there?" she asked. Ace rubbed his forehead. "Ah, hell," he muttered. Dante pulled out his handgun, checking it as his jaw clenched and unclenched. He stared firmly at Lily. "You do not open this door or fire your weapon," he said. Voice low, but no nonsense. "Do you understand?" She tongued her cheek. "But if this goes south, you're making it back," he cut in. She pressed her lips into a thin line, and then nodded, stepping away from him. "Where do you want me?" Ace murmured. "If I get in a firefight, you cover me from the window," Dante replied. The redneck nodded sharply. "Got it," he said. Dante moved over to the front door, opening it quietly and making his way onto the front lawn. The trio of QXR mercenaries weren't paying him any attention, relishing their mental torment of their prisoners. "Should we march him over to the water, or just pop him right here?" one of them asked. Another shook his head. "I don't want to carry them, do you?" "Yeah, they might run," the other pointed out. Dante moved closer, keeping his gun aimed at the man on the right. He studied them carefully, noting that they weren't wearing protective vests, and he assumed that was because they hadn't been expecting to deal with gunfire that day. When he was within 10 yards, one of the civilians caught sight of Dante, as the mercenaries finally agreed on what to do, and one of them drew a handgun. "Whoa, don't we even get last words or anything?" the civilian asked. The mercenaries glanced at each other and broke out into laughter. "He's got balls, I'll give him that," one of them said, wiping pretend tears from his eyes. The one with the gun cocked the hammer menacingly. "Not for long he doesn't," he drawled, and began to raise his weapon. Dante opened fire, his first shot ripping right through the mercenary on the right, sending a splatter of blood onto the woman beneath him. "What the fuck?" one of the other men blurted, too stunned to react. Dante adjusted his aim just as another mercenary whipped around with his gun. The civilian that had tried for a distraction leapt to his feet, tackling the would-be assassin. Dante unloaded several shots in rapid succession towards the other man, panic firing as his opponent attempted to draw his weapon. The first 2 shots missed, but the third caught him in the throat, and he fell to the ground, grasping at the gaping neck wound and gasping for air. Dante rushed over to the remaining man as the mercenary gurgled, his life bleeding out into the grass. The civilian laid haymaker after haymaker into the mercenary's face, cracking it more with every blow. Dante kicked the gun away and then grabbed the civilian's arm. "That's enough," he said. "The fuck it is," the man cried. "That's enough," Dante repeated firmly. "I need information from him. After that, he'll be just like his friends here." The bearded man looked up at him. The fire quenched a little in his eyes and nodded, getting out of the way. Dante knelt down onto the mercenary's chest, leaning so that his face was only a foot away from the broken one below. "My sister Grace was taken by your men from the bridge the day this shit started," he said in a low, menacing tone. "Where is she?" "Fuck if I know," the man spat. "And even if I did, I wouldn't be saying shit." Dante whipped out his knife. "Sounds like a man who wants to eat his own testicles," he said, lowering the blade to the quivering man's crotch. "I can make that happen." He pressed hard into the bulge, and the man whimpered. Okay, Jesus, man," the mercenary begged. Dante didn't let up with the knife, but didn't push it in any further. "Now where is she?" he asked. "Can she fight?" the man asked shakily. Dante's brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with anything?" he asked. "Everything," the mercenary said. "Can she fight?" He shrugged. "Yeah, she can handle herself. Why?" "If you're right, they're probably keeping her in Harbor Town," the mercenary grunted. Dante cocked his head. "What's that?" "Stronghold, south of the island," the mercenary explained. "Theo Atkinson likes people who can perform, so he keeps them close." Dante sighed. "Shit." "Oh, you thought you were going to rescue her?" the mercenary mocked, finding some bravery and laughing. Man, whatever fucked your face up must have done something to your brain. You aren't getting on that island, let alone getting back off in one piece. Dante narrowed his eyes. We'll see, he said. Well, you won't. He brought the blade up and slashed the man's neck without warning. The smug expression quickly turned to terror as the man bled out, reaching up and grasping his neck in a vain attempt to stop the bleeding. Dante kicked his hand away, hatred boiling in his gut. He wasn't exactly happy with what he'd become, but he knew he had to be this way if he was going to survive the apocalypse and save his sister. He looked up at the bearded civilian, who stared in shock at the scene, white as a sheet. Had to be done, Dante said gruffly. I know, the man stammered. It's just shocking to see up close. Dante, Lily cried from the doorway of the house. You okay? She rushed over with Ace in tow. Yeah, I'm fine, he said, and got to his feet, staring at the ground. She furrowed her brow, putting a gentle hand on his arm. You don't look fine, she said. I think I know where Grace is, and it isn't good, he replied. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry, she said softly. If he was telling the truth about Arbortown, it's worse than you think, the civilian piped up, and the trio turned to him. How so? Dante asked. The man motioned vaguely over his shoulder. That place is like a fortress, he said. Hundreds of men, fortified positions. Only way you're getting in is if you're invited. You've been there? Ace asked. No, but someone else in our camp has, the man replied. Said he's never seen anything like it. Ace cocked his head. Where was your camp? He asked. Northern part of the island at the airport, the man explained. They converted one of the airplane hangars into a prison. Take us out in groups at a time to do their dirty work. Like clearing houses? Lily asked. Clearing houses and neighborhoods, the man confirmed with a nod. Dangerous stuff that they didn't want to do. Ace growled. Fucking cowards, he barked, kicking the dead mercenary closest to him and then spitting on his body. You got what you deserve. When you were in your holding pens, did any of you meet a girl named Grace? Dante continued, desperation in his tone. She would have been there with a large man named Troy. The civilians looked around at each other, but they all shook their heads. I'm sorry, man, the bearded man said. That's not to say they weren't there, though. There's been a couple hundred people in and out of that place. The older man with the bleeding nose raised his hand from his sitting position on the grass. I might have seen her, but not there, he said. Where? Dante demanded. A group of us were clearing out this beachfront area, and we were losing a lot of people, the man explained. Finally, they pulled us out and brought in this other group to do the job. None of us had seen them before, but I distinctly remembered that a girl was leading the way. I found it funny to see this woman leading a group of big burly men, but after seeing the look on her face, I would have followed her into battle too. That's got to be her, Lily said. Dante took a deep breath. How long ago was that? He said. 4, maybe 5 days, the man replied. I've kind of lost track of time. Dante nodded. It's okay, he said. Thank you. So now what? Ace asked. First thing we have to do is hide these bodies, Dante replied, motioning to the dead mercenaries. Let's get them into the house. The bearded civilian nodded and moved over to help Dante grab the closest one. The others picked up the remaining 2 and the group moved them into the house. The civilians grabbed their supplies from where they'd been camped out and then slammed the door behind them as they came back outside. Do you know where their vehicle is? Dante asked. The bearded civilian shook his head. No, but we heard gunfire a block over, he said. Good a place as any to start looking, Dante replied, and led his significantly larger group through the yards, making it over to the next street. They found an SUV parked in the middle of the road, with a few zombie corpses laying a few yards away. That's your ride. Come on, Dante said. He headed for the trunk, lifting up the back compartment to reveal 3 assault rifles. He took one and tossed it to Lily before grabbing one for himself. Hope you don't mind, but we're going to take 2 of these, he said. The bearded civilian raised his palms. "You saved our asses, so you take what you want," he said firmly. "So, what do we do now?" the bleeding old man asked. "Where do we go?" "I tell you what you do," Ace declared. "You get in this vehicle, hang a right on that highway, and you keep driving west until you run out of gas." "Where would that take us?" the older man asked. Ace shrugged. "Fuck if I know," he admitted. "But you'll be so far away from these assholes that you won't have to worry about them anymore." The civilians all glanced at each other, shrugging and nodding. "Good enough for me," the old man said. The bearded man approached Dante, holding out his hand to shake his. "I hope you find your sister," he said sincerely. "I appreciate that," Dante replied. "Good luck to you." The quartet got into the SUV and took off, hanging a right on the highway and flooring it. Almost as soon as they were out of view, engines to the north of them roared, and close. Before they even had a chance to react and hide, 2 SUVs appeared in the street, screaming towards them. "Fuck, what do we do?" Ace cried. "The truck is like a mile away." "Run for it," Dante barked. Ace and Lily took off running, but Dante turned towards the vehicles, now only a couple of blocks away. He raised his new assault rifle and opened fire. Bullets peppered the front of the lead vehicle, causing it to swerve. The SUV behind it swerves in the opposite direction, both slamming on the brakes. Dante used the brief window to tear off after Ace and Lily, who were a few houses ahead of him. As he pumped his legs, he heard the SUVs rev up, one driving from the rear and the other parallel to them. He looked up at the cross street about 30 yards ahead of his friends. The SUV roared past him, one street up, trying to flank them. "Get into the house!" Dante screamed. "Get into the house!" Ace looked back, Lily still in the lead. Dante frantically pointed to the road north of them where the SUV was flying down. Tires screeched to a stop and then promptly picked back up, presumably as it tore around the corner. "Lily, come on!" Ace cried, when he caught on what was happening. She looked and saw her cousin breaking from the road and heading towards the nearest house. Dante motioned for her to follow, and she nodded, taking off. He stayed in the road, turning to the north and raising his weapon. He didn't have to wait long as a QXR mercenary came barreling around the corner of a house, apparently having leapt from the vehicle when it stopped. Dante squeezed off a few quick shots, hitting the front of the house and driving the soldier behind cover. He used the extra few seconds to run towards the nearest structure, 2 doors down from the one Ace and Lily were in. As he ran, the Merc opened fire, narrowly missing Dante as he wove a bit through the front yard. He didn't have time to go for the door, nor risk if it was locked, so he aimed his rifle for the front window and opened fire. Bullets ripped through the glass and cheap wooden frame, weakening it. As bullets continued to fly around him, Dante dove shoulder first through the window. It was a rough landing, his shoulder and face bouncing off of a wooden table that crumpled beneath him. He slammed hard into the ground, the wind knocked completely out of him. As he gasped for air, bullets peppered the front of the house, sending wooden debris flying everywhere. All of the noise attracted the attention of a few zombies that had been locked inside. 2 ghouls moaned loudly as they shambled out of the kitchen and into the living room where Dante lay. Bullets hit their torsos, which did nothing to slow them down. He tossed his assault rifle to the side and drew his handgun, taking careful aim at the lead creature before firing. The shot went off when the zombie was only a yard away from him, the bullet ripping through the top of its head. The corpse fell forward, landing on top of him and pinning him. The other creature, its torso still riddled with bullets from outside, quickly got up onto its knees to come in for a snack. Dante's gun hand was pinned underneath the dead zombie. As he struggled to free it, he was forced to buck upwards to move the dead ghoul a bit, which loosened his hand and hit the attacking ghoul, throwing it off balance a bit. The creature quickly recovered and went in for a bite, leaning over its dead comrade to try and take a chunk out of Dante's still pinned hand. The only thing he could do was grab the corpse with his weaponless free hand, wrapping his fingers around the blood-soaked collar. The zombie thrashed about, trying to bite the hand holding it in place, all the while Dante struggled to free his weapon, but couldn't due to the added weight of the attacking ghoul. Finally, he did the only thing he could do, which was to shove the creature's head upwards so it was visible in the window.
"You'd better be a good shot,"
Dante grunted. He held it in place for a second before a bullet ripped through its head. He quickly let it go so it slumped out of sight, hoping he'd convinced the attacker that he was dead. He quickly freed himself from the zombie pin before grabbing his assault rifle and crawling over to the window. He took up position at the corner, looking out at the yard, watching the gunman from across the street break from cover to come up and confirm his kill. Dante readied his assault rifle, preparing to strike when he was confident he could get a kill shot. As the mercenary moved across the street, his weapon raised and aimed at the front of the house. He quickly turned towards the house Ace and Lily were in when a torrent of gunfire erupted. He couldn't tell who was doing the firing, QXR or his friends, but he used the distraction to his advantage. He popped up from cover, took quick aim, and sent a few rounds towards the merc in the street. His aim wasn't perfect, but it was good enough as bullets shredded the man's gut and lower torso, sending him to the ground in a heap. Dante could hear him screaming in pain, glancing out to see that the force of the bullets had caused him to drop his weapon. The quick view didn't last too long as several streams of bullets ripped into the house, forcing him to the ground. He could hear yelling from outside, coming from the street away from the house Ace and Lily were in, likely coming from the SUV group from the flank. Bullets continued to pepper the house as he climbed on his stomach towards the back door. Once he was in the kitchen, he saw the exit, a large glass sliding door. He scrambled to his feet and rushed over to it, throwing it open and darting into the backyard. As soon as his foot hit the grass, a zombie came at him, attracted by the noise. He also heard footsteps coming up from the side of the house, which was only a couple of yards away. The zombie reached out for him, and Dante reached out in return, grabbing it by the arm and flinging it back towards the side of the house. As the zombie stumbled forward, the QXR mercenary came barreling out from around the corner with his gun raised. The creature immediately forgot about Dante and started attacking the new prey that was right in front of it. The merc fired his rifle, but the bullets ripped through the ghoul's torso, doing nothing. He let go of his weapon to hold the zombie at bay, and Dante quickly raised his, firing through the zombie into the chest of his attacker. The man dropped to his knees from the impact of the bullets, giving the ghoul an opportunity to latch onto his shoulder. The wounded man let out a bit of a scream, all he could muster after being shot. A split second later, bullets shredded both the mercenary as well as the zombie. Dante didn't wait around to see what had caused that. Rather, started sprinting towards the highway to the south, which was a block away with one more row of houses between them. He managed to get to the next house before the other mercenaries could get to the side and spot him. He took a knee by the corner and checked his weapons, seeing that the assault rifle was only about half full on the mag. The gunfire at the house Ace and Lily were in continued to erupt, with what sounded like several different guns going off. "Come on, get out of there, come on," Dante prayed quietly, staying planted in his position. He tried to formulate a plan quickly, but nothing was coming to mind. He knew as soon as he broke cover that the two soldiers at the side of the last house would gun him down. He was lucky to avoid one gunman, but wasn't keen on trying his luck with two. A few moments later, he was relieved to see the back door fly open, Ace and Lily both tearing out. They got halfway across the yard when the two mercs that were pursuing them noticed and raised their weapons, yelling out for them to stop. Dante didn't have a choice, raising his assault rifle and opening fire on the two men that were about 25 yards away. The distance was too great for him to get a good shot, but his firing did what he needed it to do, which was draw their attention towards him. The two men took the bait, firing towards Dante, and he continued to spray them with rapid bullets. One of his shots found the target, hitting the man in the leg. His partner continued firing wildly with one hand while dragging his buddy to the safety of the house. As they vanished inside, Dante turned his attention towards the house that Ace and Lily came from. He spotted 3 men emerging from the side and back door of the house in hot pursuit. He fired off the remainder of his magazine in their direction, forcing them behind cover and buying his friends a little more time to get away. As soon as his weapon clicked empty, he dropped it on the ground and took off running towards the highway. Ace and Lily yelled from the other side of the road, waving from behind some trees.
"Get over here!"
Lily hissed. Dante ran in their direction, pulling his handgun out as he went.
"Get to the water!"
he called.
"Swim across!"
Lily stared at him in concern, but Ace grabbed her arm and started dragging her towards the water. She tried to shake him off, but he jerked her along with him.
"We gotta swim, girl," he barked.
Dante was about 20 yards from them when the gunfire broke out again. Ace pulled Lily deeper into the trees, shielding them from the gunfire. Dante was forced to stop running towards them, instead heading off-road, ducking behind a tree that was immediately struck with bullets. He turned and fired blindly in the general direction of the gunfire, but quickly saw how much trouble he was in. There were 2 armed men that had taken up position on the right, and 3 to his left, putting him in a kill zone. Virtually all of them were firing, sending a constant stream of bullets in his direction. He didn't aim, rather he just pointed the gun around a tree and fired, hoping to buy the others a little more time. Dante's gun went dry, and he quickly ejected the mag, slamming in a spare he'd pulled from his back pocket. He fired a few more times but saw that the trio of men on his left were working their way across the street, and in his direction, firing to keep him pinned down.
"You 2 better be in the water,"
he murmured, and then fired a few more rounds before breaking from cover and running through the trees, darting around the trunks as they splintered from the bullets. A sharp, white-hot pain exploded in the upper part of his right arm, and he stumbled off balance as a bullet ripped through his bicep. He glanced down and saw the wound was off to the side and not straight through. Still, it hurt like a son of a bitch. He didn't have time to tend to it, however, as the bullets continued to fly, but the water was just 10 yards ahead of him. As he approached, he spotted Ace and Lily off to his right, about halfway across the large body of water, about 3/4 of a mile to the land on the other side. Dante quickly dove into the water and started swimming, the salt water burning in his gunshot, but causing him to focus even more on getting out as far as he could. When he reached 30 yards offshore, footsteps echoed from the trees. He knew he was close enough for them to pick him off, so he did the only thing he could, which was dive. He took the deepest breath he'd ever taken in his life, even bigger than when he rushed into the burning house to save Lily. He submerged himself, pushing down several yards. He squeezed his wound, causing blood to squirt out and swirl in the water. It was incredibly painful, but it created a large pool of crimson that rose to the surface. He hoped it would be enough to convince them that he was dead, but all it seemed to do was encourage them to shoot the area. Bullets hit the water and moved all around, narrowly missing him as he swam deeper and towards the other patch of land. His eye burned as he kept it open, the salt causing irritation, but he had no choice. He had to know where he was going. A few moments later the bullets stopped, but he kept swimming well underneath the surface. He continued on for a solid minute before his lungs started to burn. The air inside them became low, forcing him to start his ascent. When he came near the surface, pumping his arms to keep most of his body underneath the water, he pushed his face just above the waterline. He took a giant breath as soon as he could, while trying to remain as hidden and submerged as possible. With his lungs full again, he kept his eye above water, looking at the situation. He managed to get halfway across the channel, much to his surprise. Apparently, the adrenaline pumping through his veins had made him a fantastic swimmer. He looked back towards the shoreline, seeing the mercenaries wandering back into the trees, apparently satisfied that they'd taken him out. With them gone, he allowed himself to pop out of the water and swim on the surface. As the fear and adrenaline left his body, the pain in his bullet wound intensified, making it more difficult to swim. It took several minutes to get close to the shore, and by that time his right arm was all but useless and he hauled himself through the sea with one arm.
"Dante!"
Lily yelled, racing towards the shoreline with Ace in tow. She dove in and swam towards him, about 50 yards out, and Ace close behind, and the 2 helped him drag his body through the water back to the beach. As soon as he was in the sand, the trio collapsed, Dante flopping down on his back, chest heaving. Lily immediately began inspecting the bullet wound. "Oh my God, you're shot!" she cried, pressing her hands against his arm. "Are you okay? Please be okay." He found the energy to smile weakly at her. "Just a flesh wound," he rasped. "I'm going to be fine." She pressed harder, and he winced, covering it up with another smile. "Are you two okay?" he asked. "Yeah, we're fine, Scarface," Ace drawled, sitting up from the sand. "Your girl there knows her way around a rifle. Not sure if she killed anybody, but she sure as shit kept them at bay so we could get away." Dante nodded. "I managed to take a couple of them out," he said. "At least, I think I did." "That puts you up at 5 for the day," the redneck drawled. "At this rate, we should have that island cleared of assholes in a few weeks." Dante hissed as Lily applied more pressure, and then let out a low chuckle. "If it's all the same to you, can we bump that up to a month or so?" he croaked. "Going to be a few days before my body can handle another outing like this." "Well, don't start getting comfy just yet, hun," Lily said gently. "We still have to figure out how to get back." She used her knife to cut into the bottom of her wet shirt and tore a strip from the fabric, beginning to wrap it around his arm. Dante groaned. "Where are we again?" he asked. "Little place called Palmetto Bluff," Ace drawled. "Should be some houses around here we can find as a ride." Dante peeled himself from the ground, giving Lily enough time to tie his makeshift bandage into a tight knot. "Let's get moving then," he said as she finished up. "I don't think they're going to come on this side of the water, but I'd rather not stick around to find out." The three of them moved off of the beach and through the trees towards what they hoped was civilization and transportation. Chapter 5. It had been half an hour or so since the trio washed up on the shore. They finally worked their way through the wooded area to a road, looking around and seeing nothing but empty space. "You sure there is civilization around here, cuz?" Lily asked, skepticism in her tone. Ace wrinkled his nose. "I'm telling you, there's houses and shit," he said. "I dated a girl who lived in these parts." "Did you ever pick her up?" his cousin asked, crossing her arms. "Well, no," he replied slowly. "She just said she lived here." Lily shook her head, rolling her eyes at her cousin's epic level of dumbassery. "Let's just start heading west," Dante suggested. "Maybe we'll run into something." As he started to lead the group, he put his hand on his wound, making sure the bleeding had stopped. The makeshift bandage wasn't soaked crimson, so that was a good sign. "How's it feel?" Ace asked. Dante shook his head. "Burns a little," he admitted. "Salt water didn't help, that's for sure." "Good thing we did that warehouse run earlier in the week," the redneck replied. "We should have enough drugs to patch you up." Lily wrinkled her nose. "Gotta get back first," she muttered. "We'll get there," Ace insisted, pointing a finger at her. "I'm telling you, there's stuff around here." They walked along for another 20 minutes or so, keeping an eye on their rear to make sure there were no surprises. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they saw buildings in the distance. A small mini-mall on the right side of the road stood proudly, just big enough for a handful of small stores. "See, I told you stuff was around here," Ace declared excitedly. As the group got closer, they saw a car in the parking lot, along with 10 or so zombies milling around it. "Damn," Lily murmured. Ace grinned. "Don't worry, we can handle them," he declared. He reached down for his machete, but found the holster empty. He reached for his handgun, but it was also missing. "Well, maybe y'all can," he said sheepishly. "Apparently my weapons are at the bottom of the sea." "You got anything, hun?" Dante asked. Lily pulled out her knife with a shrug. "That swim was a lot more difficult than I thought," she admitted. "Had to shed some stuff along the way. What about you?" He pulled out his handgun and checked the mag, seeing it only had a few shots left. "Not going to be enough to take them all down, but should help out nonetheless," he said. "What about the noise?" Ace asked. Going to have to risk it, I'm afraid, Dante replied, shaking his head. We should be far enough away that they won't be able to hear the gunshots, and if we're not, then it means they're already looking for us. In which case, we need to get the hell out of Dodge ASAP. So, what's the play? Ace asked, cracking his knuckles. Dante handed Ace his knife, moving his gun to his uninjured arm. One shot should pull them in my direction, he said. When they spread out, I want you and Lily to start taking the ones out from the back. I'll lure them up the road while you two stay out of sight. With any luck, we'll be able to take them out. Let's get 'em, cowboy, Ace declared, raising a victorious fist. Dante walked up the road, staying on the far left side to give himself as much space between him and the zombies as possible. As he did so, the other two moved to the right side, stopping about 30 yards away from the mob and hiding out behind some trees. Dante continued walking, watching the ghouls all pawing at the car and the front of the building. He let his focus wander a bit, looking at the storefronts, finding several empty but one that looked like a small restaurant. Should at least be able to get some knives in there, he thought, and then shook his head. Focus, man, focus. He waited until he was parallel with the zombies before letting out a yell. I'm over here, he bellowed. Come and get me! A few of the ghouls near the back of the car turned and noticed him, immediately beginning their moaning pursuit. Their cries fell on deaf ears, though, as the other creatures continued trying to get into the car and restaurant. At about 15 yards away from the main group, Dante took aim and fired at the lead of the trio moving towards him. The aim was true, and when he fired, he blew the back of its head out over the pavement. The gunshot did what the moans couldn't do, which was get the rest of the others to follow. One by one, they broke off and started coming after Dante, forming a nice conga line of rotted flesh. He took aim as the next zombie closed in within 5 yards, firing again and taking the creature down. There was one more ghoul within 10 yards of him and closing, while the rest was still 10 yards behind it. As he took aim on the last one that was closest, he glanced past and spotted Ace and Lily emerging from the trees, speed-walking towards the mini-horde that had its back to them. Ace used a quick knife strike to the back of the zombie in the rear, allowing Lily to dart around it and do the same to the next one. As the corpses fell to the ground, Dante let out another yell to keep the ghouls' attention on him. The closest one to him crossed within 5 yards, which was close enough for his comfort. He looked past at Ace and Lily, about to strike again, and stepped to the side to fire his final shot into the close corpse's face. The gunshot kept the attention on him as his friends made quick work of the line. Kill strike after kill strike. A few seconds later, the threat had been completely neutralized. Dante looked around. You two good? He asked. Both Ace and Lily gave him a thumbs up, and he smiled with relief. The duo walked towards the car to have a look, and Dante picked his way around the heap of corpses to join them. When he approached his friends, Ace was standing there shaking his head. Problem? Dante asked. You tell me, the redneck drawled, motioning to the car window. Dante leaned over and peered inside. It was complete carnage inside. A family full of bite marks, blood pools, crimson smeared everywhere. Only positive is that it looks like the keys are still in the ignition, Ace said. We just gotta clear 'em out before we can hit the road. I'm not sure I want to be fighting those critters with just a knife if they're gonna be seeing me coming. Dante took a deep breath and glanced over at Lily, who was peering inside the restaurant window. See anything? He asked. Looks empty to me, she called back. Of course, with the way our day is going, that means there's about 30 in the kitchen. One problem at a time, Dante replied. If the dining room is clear, let's hope for the best. She nodded and smashed the small glass panel beside the doorknob. She reached inside and unlatched the door, and then held up a hand when Dante stepped forward. You're wounded, she said. Let me take the lead. He clenched his jaw with worry, but nodded. Lily opened the door and entered, the men quickly following and securing the door behind them. The dining area was small, about 15 tables, and it didn't look like there had been much of a disturbance at all. The light was minimal, but there was enough to see that nothing was moving in the immediate vicinity. Lily moved to the front counter, seeing a small bell on it. She smacked her hand down a few times, waiting to see if moans erupted from the kitchen at the noise. "I think we're clear," she declared. Ace walked by her, going around the counter and looking into the kitchen to confirm that it was empty.
"Yep, nothing's been in here since this shit started," he called.
"Good, it might mean there's some food back there," she replied. "This whole running for our lives thing really works up an appetite." Ace glanced back to Dante, who was typically all business at times like this, especially when they might have been being hunted. Dante just blinked at him.
"Well, you heard the lady," he said. "We got food or not?"
The redneck grinned.
"Let's find out,"
he exclaimed, and disappeared into the kitchen to rummage around. A few moments later he emerged and tossed a loaf of highly processed bread onto the counter, followed by 2 industrial-sized containers of peanut butter and jelly.
"It ain't gourmet, but it'll do in a pinch. Y'all dish up and I'll see if I can find us something to use on those car dwellers."
Dante slid onto one of the stools by the counter, and Lily slipped behind, shooting him a wink and putting a hand on her hip. "Well, hi there, hon. What can I get you today?" she asked sweetly. He chuckled, leaning on the countertop.
"Got any specials?"
"Got PB&J, she said, holding up a finger, and then raised a second one. "And we got PB&J."
"Guess I'll go with PB&J then," he replied.
She winked at him and set out 6 pieces of bread to make 3 sandwiches. As she spread the peanut butter, there was a clatter from the kitchen, and Ace let out a whoop, emerging holding 3 giant chef's knives.
"Man, check this out," he cried. "These blades have to be like 1.5 feet long. That should give us enough reach to take them things out."
Lily raised an eyebrow as she slathered strawberry jam across the slices of bread. "Nothing bigger back there?" she asked, without looking up from her work.
"Lil, we're in a small restaurant. What are you wanting?"
Ace scoffed. "Pitchforks? Flamethrowers? Hell, we're lucky they even had these." She sighed. "Yeah, fair enough," she admitted. "You want a sandwich?"
"Hell yeah, I do,"
he replied. Before she could smash the pieces of bread together to complete the sandwiches, the trio froze in horror at the sound of a vehicle speeding up and slamming on the brakes outside the restaurant.
"Get down,"
Dante hissed to Lily.
"Shit, how'd they find us?"
Ace cried. Lily shook her head. "Pile of corpses outside probably gave us away," she retorted.
"Son of a bitch," the redneck groaned. "What do we do?"
"You stay quiet and follow my lead," Dante said firmly.
"Good enough for me,"
Ace agreed. Dante shot Lily a pointed look, and she pursed her lips, lowering down to the floor just as the front door flew open. A man burst in wielding a shotgun, dressed in clean jeans and a work shirt.
"Hands where I can see 'em now," he barked.
Dante and Ace raised their hands, the former appraising the newcomer. He didn't look like he was QXR. He looked like a mid-30s factory dog.
"You, behind the counter,"
the man barked, and Lily glanced up, realizing the backsplash was mirrored enough that he could see her ducking there.
"Stand up now. I'd really prefer not to have to ask you twice."
She closed her eyes for a moment, cursing under her breath. "Come on up, Lily," Dante murmured. She reluctantly raised her hands and stood up. "Sorry, Dante," she whispered. He smiled at her. "It's okay." The man stared them down, still aiming his shotgun in their direction.
"You got anybody else back there I should know about?" he demanded.
"No, sir. It's just the 3 of us," Dante said. The man narrowed his eyes, and he focused on the wound, grinding his teeth for a moment.
"Did you get bitten?"
he said firmly. Dante shook his head. "Bullet wound," he explained. But the man didn't seem convinced. "You're more than welcome to come take a look for yourself."
"I'll take your word for it, for now,"
the man replied, not moving an inch.
"Now I got one very important question for y'all. Are you assholes?"
The trio exchanged confused glances, not sure how to proceed.
"I said," the man bellowed, Are you assholes?
Ace jutted out his chin.
Hell yeah, we're fucking assholes, he snapped.
But we're not those mercenary assholes, which is what I assume you're asking. The man regarded them for another moment, and then laughed, lowering his gun.
That, right there, is a correct answer, he drawled. Y'all can put your hands down now. I ain't gonna hurt you. I'm Benji.
Dante shook his head. I'm Dante, he introduced, motioning to the others. This is my girl Lily and her cousin Ace.
Normally, when I meet new people in this little restaurant, I'd buy y'all a cup of coffee and welcome you to town,
Benji said, and inclined his head towards the counter.
But seeing as how y'all already helped yourselves to lunch, I guess we'll skip that part. Why don't you tell me what you're doing here?
Dante nodded as Lily and Ace dug into their sandwiches. We were over in South Bluffton, scouting Hilton Head when we ran into some of those, assholes, as you put it, he said. Had to swim across the water to get to safety.
They still after you?
Benji asked. Dante shook his head. No, they chased us out to the water and took a chunk out of my arm, but called it a day after that, he explained.
Guess the next question is, why in the hell were you scouting out Hilton Head? Benji continued. That's not a place you want to be anywhere near, let me tell you.
Dante's gaze darkened. Those assholes have my sister, he said. Benji's face hardened, and he took a deep breath, nodding.
Is that a fact? He asked slowly.
Yes, sir, it is, Dante replied firmly.
Well, Benji said with a sigh, rubbing his chin. I can't do a whole lot to help you get on the island. I can, however, get your arm patched up. My place is just a mile up the road. Why don't you all come over for a bit? Dante glanced at his friends as they finished up their sandwiches, and the trio exchanged a series of nods. Lead the way, sir, he said, picking up his sandwich to eat on the way. Benji walked them out to his bright blue truck and inclined his head to Lily. Ma'am, why don't you ride up front with me? He offered. The boys can ride in the back with Tank there. Ace started to climb up into the bed, and a big bloodhound sauntered over, his big tongue slicking all over the redneck's face. Don't you worry. Tank's as friendly as they come, Benji said. Ace laughed, struggling to get the big dog to settle down so he could help Dante into the back of the old truck. The drive was a quick one, only taking a couple of minutes. Benji made the turn into a large scrapyard with a tall sheet metal fence around it. There were spikes driven through the wall, some of which had a few dead ghouls impaled on them. Once they were through, he hopped out and shut the gate, securing it with a chain before driving them up to the building in the center. The structure wasn't terribly big, maybe 1,000 square feet, and it seemed to double as an office, workshop, and living space. Once the truck's engine shut down, everyone hopped out and looked around. The scrapyard was filled with all kinds of metal treasure. Radiators, piles of metal shards, some old cars, even some railroad tack. Got quite the collection here, Dante said as he studied the piles. Yeah, buddy. The last decade or so has been a gold mine for me, Benji said as he let Tank down from the back of the truck to lumber around, tail and tongue wagging. All these big city developers coming in, wanting to take out the old and put in the overpriced new. They give me free rein to take whatever I wanted, so long as I left them an empty lot afterwards. The irony is that I was making more off my work than they were building those new cheap-ass homes. Dante looked over at an ornate metal gate leaning up against a car. He gave it a flick of his finger, setting off a nice ping. They don't make 'em like they used to, do they? He mused. No, sir, they don't, Benji agreed, chuckling. Now, come on, let's get that arm patched up. They followed him inside, led by Tank, who immediately trotted off to his water bowl and began to slurp loudly. Go on and have a seat on the couch there, Benji said, motioning to a couch that was probably older than he was, and maybe hadn't been cleaned since the day Dante was born.
I'll be right back." Dante didn't want to offend, so he took a seat as Ace and Lily remained standing, looking at the old war photos and antique hubcaps on the wall. "He's got quite a collection here," Ace said, letting out a low whistle.
"Yeah, it's not bad," she agreed.
"Well, thank you," Benji drawled as he reappeared in the doorway. "I try to hold on to stuff I think my dad would have liked. He started this place back in the 60s, practically grew up here, and took it over when he passed a few years back." Lily's gaze softened as she turned to him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to bring up bad memories." "Nah, it ain't no big thing," he assured her. "Although I think he would have gotten a kick out of this new world we're living in." She raised an incredulous brow. "Oh yeah?" she asked, confused. "Why do you say that?" "Well, he always wanted to shoot a few of the neighbors who complained about this place," Benji explained. "Just a shame he missed out on that opportunity." Ace burst out laughing, slapping his thigh. "This right here is our kind of people," he said, pointing at their new friend. Everyone chuckled, and he nodded in agreement. "Well, if those mercenary assholes are shooting at you, I'm going to assume we're on the same team here," he declared, and sat down next to Dante with his first aid kit. He untied the makeshift bandage and took some gauze from the box, using some antiseptic to wipe down the wound. "Oh yeah, just a little through and through," he said. "I'll have you stitched up in no time." Chapter 6. "There you go, good as new," Benji declared, sitting back to admire his handiwork. "Just don't move it or touch it for a few days." Dante chuckled. "Thanks, I'll do my best." Benji affixed one more piece of medical tape to his arm to secure the bandage in place. "You know, if you all are thirsty, I have some bottled water I can share," he said. "Don't have a lot, but I'm happy to help." "You've already done a lot," Dante assured him. "It wouldn't feel right taking that from you." Benji smiled. "That's very kind of you," he said, "but I'm pretty sure I have some other things that might help you out." He jumped to his feet and tossed the packed-up first aid kit on the coffee table, approaching a workbench that was stacked several feet high with various papers and printed material. He rummaged through it for a moment and then turned around with an old piece of canvas. He slapped it down on the coffee table and waved everyone forward. "Here we have a dedicated map of Hilton Head and Bluffton," he said. Lily's eyes widened. "Where in the world did you get this?" she asked. "Cleared out of school a few years back," Benji explained. "And they had a room full of maps. Just didn't feel right letting them get tossed, so I gave them a good home." Dante leaned over the table. "Do you know where Harbortown is?" he asked. "Sure," Benji replied, and took out a grease pencil from the pocket of his work shirt and circled a small area on the southwest tip of the island, right where a dock was. "Richest of the rich live there," he explained. "Got to go there a few times over the years when they were renovating the golf course clubhouse. Didn't really get a whole lot outside of a tour of the place, but still, kind of wild to walk around with the rich folk for a bit." Dante pursed his lips and then sat up straight. "Can I pick your brain for a minute?" he asked. Benji shrugged. "There ain't a whole lot up there, but pick away," he said. "If you were going to take a raft, or swim over from the island, where would you do it from?" Dante asked. "Assuming, of course, anything south of the main bridge isn't going to work." Benji took a deep breath, looking at the ceiling for a moment before responding. "Well, Oceanside is going to have the biggest landing zone since it's all beach over there," he mused. "Problem is, you ain't going to have a launching pad, which means you're going to have to take the long way around to get to it. If you're in anything that isn't powered, you're more than likely going to be swept out to sea." He leaned over the map and thought hard for another moment. He tapped on a northern spot of the page. "Now, Paris Island is just to the north here, in the southern part of Beaufort. That's where they train a lot of those military boys once they sign on the dotted line.
Might be able to pick you up a few nice weapons up there, as well as something with a little more power than a rubber raft to get you across."
Dante nodded thoughtfully. "Risky, but not a bad idea," he said. "Anything else?" Benji pointed to a small string of islands just to the north of the bridge to Hilton Head.
"All these islands are uninhabited and not too far away from shore," he explained. "Wouldn't be a bad launching pad."
Lily shook her head. "They may have started uninhabited," she piped up, "but I can guarantee you that their population has grown significantly." Benji glanced at her curiously, and then it dawned on him what she was talking about.
"Well, little lady, I hope nobody you care about is now a resident there," he said softly.
She nodded in appreciation, sitting back. He shrugged, shaking his head.
"And, well, unless you got wings," he drawled, "that's about everything I can think of about the island."
"Honestly, that was a lot more information than I was expecting to get today," Dante admitted. "We really appreciate it."
"It's my pleasure," Benji replied. "Been far too long since Tank and I have been able to extend some hospitality to others."
Dante smiled and nodded. "Well, we don't want to overstay our welcome," he said. "If you can point us in the direction of where we can find a ride, as ours is currently unreachable, we'll get out of your hair."
"Y'all don't have to leave on my account," Benji insisted. "It's just been Tank and I since this shit started up, so having some company is nice. But I understand you got stuff that needs doing. I tell you what, I got an old junker in the back I can let you borrow. It ain't much to look at, but it can kick some major ass."
Dante playfully pointed to his face. "You talking about me, or the vehicle?" he joked. Benji's eyes widened, but then the scarred man began to laugh. He joined in, tension dissolving.
"Phew, man, I tell you what, my heart skipped a beat there when I thought I offended you," he admitted. "Not in my nature to do that."
"Unless it's the zombie neighbors you're shooting at," Ace joked.
"Oh no, I was quite polite when I shot him up," Benji declared, raising a hand. "No insults or nothing. I said offending people wasn't in my nature. Blowing the heads off of monsters, however, is."
Ace grinned.
"Like I said, my kind of people."
Benji scanned the wall, finally picking out a set of keys hanging there before tossing them over to Dante.
"It's the rusted-out muscle car in the back," he explained. "Can't miss it. Just watch it in the corners because that engine still packs a punch."
"Will do. Thank you," Dante replied with a warm smile, and took the keys. The trio walked out of the building, Lily pausing to pet Tank affectionately on her way out. The old dog licked her hand, wagging his tail, and she gave him one last scratch behind the ears before they left. They walked around the side of the building and spotted a 70s muscle car that looked like it had been driven to hell and back, then back to hell. It was rough, with rust everywhere and some holes in the bodywork.
"Man, that makes the damage you have look minor in comparison,"
Ace drawled. Dante chuckled. "Yeah, it does," he admitted. "Come on, let's get moving." As they were just about to get into the car, Benji came running around the side of the building, carrying a large metal box with a bag slung over his arm.
"Hold up, y'all," he bellowed. "Got something for you."
He smacked the box down on the hood of the car, sending rust particles flying everywhere. "What is that?" Lily asked, raising a skeptical brow.
"This, little lady, is a ham radio," Benji declared proudly. "I figured this might help you do what you need to do against those assholes on the island."
Ace blinked at him.
"How's this gonna help us do that?" he asked.
"Well, my friend, a lot of ex-military people have one of these in case of emergency," the older man explained. "Now, they're gonna be spread out all over the country, so they can't help with the island, but maybe, just maybe, they know something about the assholes that can help you out." He shrugged. "Now, I don't know if you're gonna find anything or not, but something I am confident of is that you can stay in touch with me. My frequency is on the sticker on the top, and I got a little notebook of frequencies from people I've talked to over the years. I'm usually out in the yard, working on stuff during the day, but pretty much from the time the sun goes down till I pass out, I'm on it. Got one of them hand-crank batteries, which powers it pretty good. I can get you one if you need it."
Dante nodded thoughtfully. "We have some solar panel chargers back at our place that should do the trick," he said.
"Well, hell, that's pretty fancy," Benji said. "If you come across any more of those, let me know. Might be able to scrounge up something nice to compensate you for it."
Dante patted the old car. "As far as I'm concerned, we owe you a few of those," he replied. "We know where some are and should be heading back there in a few days. In the meantime, you work up a list of things you want or need, and we'll see what we can do." The older man nodded and smiled, extending his hand to shake. Ace loaded up the ham radio, and the trio got into the car. "I'll get the gate," Benji said, walking backwards as he waved, "and we'll talk soon." "Looking forward to it," Dante said, through the driver's side window, waving back. He fired up the car, and the engine rattled for a moment before it started to hum.
"Damn, that sounds pretty good,"
Ace drawled, running a hand appreciatively across the dashboard.
"Maybe he was telling the truth about this thing."
"One way to find out," Dante said with a grin, and popped it into gear, punching the gas. The car lurched forward quickly, and he hit the brakes, laughing in response to the raw power. "Oh yeah, this is gonna work great." Chapter 7. Dante drove towards the school, squealing into the parking lot. "Man, I love this car," he groaned as he cut the engine. "Might have to go joyriding later so we can properly break it in," Lily said, leaning forward from the back seat to kiss Dante's cheek.
"Oh, goddamn, Lil," Ace whined. "Just make sure you don't stain the interior."
"I was talking about doing some burnouts and seeing how this does on the quarter mile," she replied, and then winked. "But hey, a good idea is a good idea." Her cousin groaned, scrambling out of the car, leaving the other two laughing. As they got out themselves, Maddox and Francis emerged from the school, guns at the ready. When they realized who it was, they lowered their weapons immediately.
"Where the hell did y'all get this rust bucket?" Maddox demanded. "And what happened to the truck?" "Calling today's adventure a shit show would be an insult to actual shit shows," Ace drawled, spreading his arms. "You got anything to help calm my ass down?"
Maddox jerked a thumb over his shoulder.
"I got stuff that'll make you wake up in a week, if that's what you want."
"Hell yeah, brother,"
Ace declared.
"Need help with anything?"
Francis piped up, resting his rifle on his shoulder. Dante nodded, strolling over to the back door and popping it open. "As a matter of fact, we do, big fella," he said. "Right here in the back seat." He leaned over to look and then hefted the large ham radio into his arms.
"Where would you like it?"
he asked. "Hey, we still only have power in the gym?" Dante asked. Maddox nodded.
"For the moment, yeah,"
he replied. "To the gym, good sir," Dante said with a flourish, and Francis nodded, carrying the heavy machine inside. A little while later, the group had managed to set up the equipment in the gym on the table. Henry had jerry-rigged up an antenna, running it out the door.
"So, who wants the honors?" he asked.
Everyone looked around, all eyes settling on Dante.
"Hell, man, if anybody is going to be our ambassador, it's going to be you,"
Ace drawled, clapping his friend on the back. Dante took a deep breath. "Okay, let's see what we can do," he said. He sat down and took out the small notebook that Benji had given them. He flipped through it, seeing several handles and frequencies, easily reaching in the dozens. Several of them had been crossed out, however, a few had stars drawn beside them. "Might as well start at the beginning," he murmured. Dante dialed in the frequency next to the name, Rusty NY. He clicked the radio on, and it hummed to life. He hit the send button and leaned forward into the mic. Hello?" he asked. "Is Rusty there?" He let go of the button and sat back. Lily leaned over his shoulder. "You gotta say over, hon," she whispered. "Let him know you're done talking." He blushed and fumbled with the call button, hitting it again. Over," he said, and shrugged. Everyone chuckled, and Lily gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. There was a long silence, and everyone looked around at each other. I guess try him again, and then we'll move on to the next name, Lily suggested. Dante pushed the button again. Hello, Rusty, are you there? He asked. Over? He quickly added. There was another long stretch of silence before the line clicked, and an old, gruff-sounding voice came back.
Yeah, keep your pants on. You mind telling me who the hell you are and how you know my name?
Dante took a deep breath and pushed the button again. My name is Dante, and I'm here with some other survivors down here in the South Carolina Lowcountry, he said. We got your name and this radio from Benji, who was a scrapper just outside of Hilton Head, over.
Benji, huh?
Rusty asked.
Man, I haven't talked to that cat in a week. Good to know he's still kicking with everything that's going on.
Dante nodded. We just met him today, he explained, but I get the sense he's in prime form. Tank is too.
I swear that bloodhound is going to outlive us all,
Rusty drawled. Dante took a deep breath. So, do you mind telling us where you are? He asked hesitantly. The note here says New York. Are you in the city?
If I was in the city, then I wouldn't be talking to you,
the old man quipped.
You want to talk about precipitous population drop, holy hell.
Dante's eyes widened. So this stuff is going on up there?
Man, this stuff is going on everywhere,
Rusty declared. It was as if all the air went out of the room. Even though they'd assumed it was bad all over the world, hearing it confirmed felt like a gut shot. They sat in stunned silence for a few moments.
Hey, you still there?
Rusty asked. Dante fumbled for the button. Yeah, we're here, he said quietly. Sorry about that. We have had some clues that this wasn't just happening here, but confirming that it's everywhere just took us aback a bit.
So I'm guessing y'all are in the dark about current events, huh?
Dante chuckled, letting out a deep breath. We barely know what's happening around here, let alone across the country.
Well, man, I hope you are sitting down, because none of it is good,
Rusty replied.
The military has abandoned their posts and headed off to Kansas to suck each other off or something.
Hell of a time to try and set the blow-bang world record,
Ace scoffed, and Lily smacked him.
I've heard rumors that they're going to try some big offensive,
Rusty was saying.
But nobody seems sure of where, though.
Dante shook his head. If I were a betting man, I wouldn't put money down on either of our locations being the target, he said.
You are right about that, man,
the old man agreed, chuckling.
Even if we were the target, I don't think they could get to us.
Dante's brow furrowed. Why not? He asked.
I've talked to a few people on the Mississippi River, and they all tell me the same thing,
Rusty explained.
A few days ago, some big old missiles came in and took out the bridges over the river.
There was another stunned silence amongst the group. Dante finally reached out with a shaky thumb and pressed the button. I suppose that makes sense when you think about it, he said. Something like 60% of the population lives on this side of the river. You cut that off, and the military might have a chance to establish a stronghold. Or at least, survive long enough to try.
Yeah, I thought the same thing,
Rusty agreed.
But still, pretty shitty to realize we're on the wrong side.
Dante nodded with a sigh. No doubt, he said. So, you got any good news for me?
Well, it ain't snowing up here, and one of my first finds out in the world was a transport truck bound for a liquor store,
the old man drawled.
So, even when it does snow, I'm staying warm.
The group laughed. It's the little things in life, isn't it? Dante asked, shaking his head.
Especially in these times,
Rusty agreed. Dante took another deep breath and leaned forward. Can I ask you a personal question? He said slowly.
About 8 inches, and it leans to the left a bit.
The old man shot back and then cracked up laughing, prompting the rest of the group to as well. Dante composed himself a bit and then pushed the button. Maybe not quite that personal, he said, still grinning.
Yeah, what you want to know?
Rusty drawled. Did you ever serve? Dante asked.
Yes, sir, I did,
came the immediate reply.
Spent a couple of years over in Vietnam back when you most certainly didn't want to be over there. Took some shrapnel when the chopper I was in decided to make an unscheduled landing in the middle of the jungle. Got transferred stateside after that and turned it into a pretty decent career on the logistics side of things.
Dante nodded thoughtfully. Well, first off, thank you for your service, he said. And secondly, do you know anything about QXR Group? The line was silent for a moment, and then the old man finally began.
All I know about QXR is that I don't want to know about those mercenary pricks. I sacrificed for my country, and I'm not a fan of those who only do it for a paycheck.
Apologies for asking, Dante said quickly, but I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. They've taken over Hilton Head Island and are using civilians for slave labor, killing the ones who aren't useful.
Jesus Christ,
Rusty breathed.
I knew they were money grubbers, but I had no idea they were that sadistic. Hang on a minute. I'll be right back. While I'm gone, make sure you have some pen and paper.
Dante snapped his fingers, pointing at Maddox, who darted off to a table at the other end of the gym. He returned with a notebook and a pencil, and tossed it on the table just as Rusty came back.
Okay, you there?
The old man asked. Dante nodded and hit the button. Yep, here and ready, he said.
Okay, I got a couple buddies of mine that have stayed in the military for years, even worked their way up into government,
Rusty explained.
Couple of them might have some info you find useful. No promises, mind you, but it's what I can do.
Dante nodded emphatically. I really appreciate it, he said.
Wish I could do more, but here you go,
the old man said. He started listing off names and frequencies, and Dante scribbled them down as fast as he could. Lily broke away from the group and Ace turned around to catch up to her.
Where are you going?
He asked quietly. Gonna find some coffee and something to eat for Dante, she whispered back. The look he has on his face tells me it's going to be a long night for him, and I want to do what I can to support him. Ace smiled, the warmth in his cousin's eyes showing more than she let on. I'll help you, he said. Come on. As they walked away, she glanced at Dante again, writing furiously. This information could mean the difference between getting Grace back and losing her forever. The end. Up next, after Dante's deadly raid, Theo Atkinson sends No Name and his team out to hunt down and eliminate Dante and the other troublemakers in Lowcountry, Part 10.